Hello, dear friends. We are sincerely happy to greet you again. Today we will talk with the esteemed Igor Mikhailovich Danilov.
Greetings.
Igor Mikhailovich, in one of our videos, we discussed that more and more often the following phrase may be heard from people: I lost myself. As a rule, by saying I lost myself, they mean I lost my home, I lost my business, my place of residence, my circle of acquaintances, my status in society, and they very much liked and remembered how you said, my friend, whatever you acquire in this world, you will lose it all, while the highest and most desirable status for a human should be the status of an angel. And it is very important for everyone to gain life here and now, because life, if you really gained it, is the only thing that no one, neither the devil nor his minions, can take away. You know, this topic is very relevant nowadays. There is a very big demand among people to search for the meaning of life, to search for tools to gain this life, to search for themselves. In this regard, I would like to begin our conversation with a question that we received from one of our viewers. Nowadays, very fashionable trends are Advaita and New Age, where the enlightened are sitting at satsangs and saying that there is nothing to achieve, everything is already there, you should just become aware of yourself in the moment, and so on. I would be glad to receive an answer from Igor Mikhailovich from the perspective of primordial knowledge. What has actually happened to these people, to their consciousness? After all, they say that they didn't make any effort in order to achieve enlightenment, but it just happened in one moment. How is that possible? It's just that I also came across such thoughts when people say, you should just be silent, you should simply focus on this moment here and now, and the Lord Himself will turn you into an angel. The main thing is to focus on this very moment.
They have again shifted responsibility onto God and let Him do that, and they use only small fragments of that knowledge which people have been using since ancient times to achieve spiritual perfection. As always, while what do they engage in during those practices? As a matter of fact, in magic. And what do they do that for? In order to change their material life, do they perform those practices in order to gain life eternal? A simple question.
Exactly.
Of course not. What is the goal? It is the same as, people engage in raising Kundalini, and then they transfer it all to solving material problems, don't they?
That's right, many people have already Kundalini'd a successful business for themselves, as it is said.
There is such an expression, friends. They have Kundalini'd a successful business for themselves, and so on. The same is in this case. In other words, they gain enlightenment. But what is meant by this word, enlightenment? In what sense? Have they become smarter or what? Have they become more humane? Or let's say, more successful in this material world? Well, everything is actually measured with what? They become more successful in this material world, right? Meaning they solve some problems of theirs. When a person believes that not everything is good in his life, he is shy, modest, and cannot step over himself in some situations. He feels that this hinders him when he looks at other people, how others reach some heights, let's say, in business, in their careers, while a modest and honest person cannot trample on people's heads, right? They say, in the modern consumerist world, you should have big teeth and desirably claws in order to climb this ladder. Upwards, I mean. That's what they actually do it all for. What is the goal? What is the task? And what really happens at those moments? When you focus on the here and now,
On the moment.
that is, on the current moment, if we take the circle practice, the very beginning of this practice is just to stop, as they say, time, thoughts, and everything else. I mean, what does it give? It gives sort of an initial, slight perception of oneself as personality, and that's all. That's the entire phenomenon. In other words, a person experiences a different state, one he hasn't experienced before. And again, if we take the circle practice, there is preparation there. Let's just say it's a section of knowledge and everything is serious there. Whereas if we consider those kinds of practices, then basically, maybe in the best case scenario, 1 out of 10 people get something similar to the effect As for the rest, one person makes it up that everything worked in the same way for him and just repeats someone's words. Another person's consciousness supplements it all with details, while 8 people definitely do not get anything at all.
That's right. It is actually very difficult for them to stop this very flow of time and focus on the here and now.
In this case, they cannot stop time and influence it in any way. Just for understanding, I'll tell you, so that it is clear. Our consciousness perceives the fluidity of time, both primary and secondary consciousness. We are dependent on time, and we are completely attached to it. So distance, time, all of that play a significant role for us. However, we as personalities do not perceive time at all. That is, for personality, time is like a non-existent phenomenon. So, when those people receive effects through the methods of concentration, what happens in the body at that time? They move away from primary and secondary consciousnesses, but again using primary consciousness as a tool in a mild form. They try to move away even from it, so there is a disconnection between consciousness and personality itself. And having experienced themselves as personality for the first time, they get such extraordinary inspiration.
A kind of insight.
Insight,
yes.
right, of course. It can be accompanied by flashes of light and everything else. This is indeed such an effect, let's say, for people who are far from it all, who have never been involved in anything really serious. Then this is kind of a meditative practice, so to say, which gives a person a little breath of air. Yes, the person has felt free as personality. What's next, my friends? Does he know what to do with this happiness? Can he keep it or preserve it? No. It literally lasts for an instant.
Yes, exactly.
A very short period of time. When he experiences time stop, when he realizes this moment, again, consciousness switches on at this point. He realizes, with the remaining part of primary consciousness, and the activity of personality this very moment, what is happening? He realizes that consciousness is not his, that thoughts are imposed on him. He becomes aware of the surrealism of this entire world, that it is nothing but that very matrix, in fact, right? But the point is that he begins to understand how to change something here, and in this state, in the freedom of personality, this world seems to him an ordinary simulation. But here a person also feels a little bit like an architect of this world. When he first encounters these effects, when he comes out of this state, it's not that he comes out, it just passes very quickly. This satiety remains. Why? Because primary consciousness is still partly working in this case. At the next stage, secondary consciousness gets activated as soon as he starts coming out. And here, secondary consciousness usually picks him up. Why? Because at the moment when a person stops the flow of thoughts, not time, but thoughts, a person cannot influence time in any way, let's say, such a person. Then a very interesting thing happens here. It turns out that the person doesn't spend energy. Yet what is energy? Let's again take that very real, okay? In fact, it is constantly given to a person. It is unrealistic to keep it, but at some point it accumulates. And this insignificant moment of accumulation is very interesting for secondary consciousness. What does the person get? The activity of secondary consciousness, an ease of thinking, an inner cheerfulness, also various mindsets, some attachments and some psychological traumas disappear. Why? The person has already looked at them from the other side, and for a certain period of time he can be released from that. Again, those states when it was, let's say, inconvenient for him to trample on people's heads in order to achieve some goals. In this case, everything becomes acceptable and clear. Why? Because he understands how this quagmire, this world is arranged, that everyone eats each other here and is sated with that. In other words, this suggests that empathy sharply diminishes in such people, and selfishness is generated because primary consciousness becomes very active. There are aspects of danger in this case. Let's consider it one by one. At first, a person experiences euphoria, inspiration, enlightenment, and ease of thinking, and somehow relationships between people become clear. The person can really get lost in that, let's say.
A lot of people go there for brilliant ideas, solutions of some kind, yes.
Easily. This is what I have explained. Secondary consciousness gets activated immediately. There is an ease of thinking. Again, as personality, let's say, this moment of freedom gives a comprehensive understanding of something. A person has only been in slight contact, but as soon as he comes out, he is subjected to severe attacks from the material system. But since he is of interest to secondary consciousness, it is precisely secondary consciousness that creates a real illusion for him. In other words, what he came for. If it relates to some psychological problems, it is resolved. Can it help in business? I think it can. Why? Because it is elementary magic. When a person is 100% focused on business, on prosperity, applies maximum effort and additionally engages in spiritual practices, in the initial stages of spiritual practices, I'll put it this way, friends, those are not spiritual practices, those are merely extracts from initial practices. But it still has to do with spiritual maturation of a human. But a person takes this power and begins to direct it towards attainment of what he desires. That is, he increases his potential in the material world. What happens? Magic begins to work.
Yes, exactly.
And very often a person attains something. If it is commensurate with his real power, if he can pay for what he wants, then he acquires that. But is that dangerous? Yes, it is dangerous. Yet they actually don't tell you how many people really get mental traumas, disorders, schizophrenia, and a lot of other things. Why? Because later on the system starts demanding more and more from them. A person becomes addicted, and he's forced to perform these practices regularly. Or he's forced to look for other, more powerful practices. Why? Because after a while they stop working. And there's another aspect in that too. As soon as these practices stop working, what does it mean, working? It means he accumulates this power, but he doesn't satisfy the system. So the system starts taking it away from him, and the person simply begins to lose his inner potential, his resource. He loses his energy component, and he feels that the world is falling apart. Those are again fears. Fears for oneself, for life, and for the future. Naturally, he either begins to spend more time in practices in order to compensate for that somehow because he feels better after them, or he looks for something more powerful, but already in magic. This way, he buys himself a ticket to the state of subpersonality. It's a verdict, in fact.
You know, many of them do realize that this is dangerous. They even say that, at least as they say regarding Kundalini practice, that it is dangerous because a lot of energy is released that can harm a person if he is not prepared. That's why it is so important to find an experienced guru, an experienced guide, under whose mentorship you should perform such practices and who will definitely lead you to success in a safe way.
Yet what do they call success? A simple question. Again, material prosperity.
So that the system doesn't beat you up.
Well, that's already later.
So that you succeed in everything, have success in business and material well-being.
That's already later. For starters, a person actually wants to get some material benefits. It doesn't matter, be it a psychological problem, prosperity, or some position. It still relates to our consumerist format. This person wastes his spiritual potential, that is, his energy potential, in order to gain material things instead of gaining spiritual values. Will he be rewarded for that? Sure, by the devil himself, with long centuries of torment and reflection on his bad deeds.
You know, it's just that now is the time when so many people face various anxiety states, and they begin their journey with the motive to at least calm down, perform some autogenic training and so on.
Of course.
And then people want more. So this very moment...
Do you know what else motivates them? What motivates people to do such stupid things is that they don't have to apply much effort.
Yes, exactly. They don't need to change their lives.
At all. No need to fight demons in the head. No need to do anything at all. It's enough for you just to use a practice and strive for your dream or your goal, I mean in the material world, and that's it. In other words, it is very simple, easy and clear to people how to implement it, and the most interesting thing is that it often works.
As you said, primary consciousness picks up such practices easily and happily.
It surely does, yes. And the trouble here is that a person may deviate either into a state of a great guru, when it seems to him, by the way, it really seems to him, it's already schizophrenia starting, that he is so cool that God himself is talking to him and so forth. A person is sort of capable of anything, though in fact he is capable of nothing. In fact, the only thing he can do is feed the system. But he has a sensation that he's already endowed with such superpowers or something else. Of course, this misleads not only him, but other people around him as well. Because he talks about his subjective sensations, he talks about how he perceives himself, what happens to him and how his life changes. Meanwhile, what is our life? Friends, Tatiana and I once talked about simulation. What is in our head, let's just say, that's exactly what is perception for us in reality. As a matter of fact, this is reality, that which we perceive in our head. Yet we can have anyone in our head and he can tell us anything. In the head is a figurative expression, it doesn't mean in the head itself. But in fact, this is so. And the most interesting thing is that we as personalities, I'll repeat, we already said it more than once, but I'll say it again, we cannot have a critical attitude to what we see and perceive in our lives if it's a substitution. In this case, we can slip into schizophrenia, into deep delusions, or into states which are extremely difficult to escape from.
Right, and it is very scary that such gurus immobilize people.
Of course.
They basically say that a person doesn't need to do anything. He doesn't need to improve himself, that is, to work on himself in some way.
And why mature? After all, it's enough to sit and do nothing, just to focus on this very moment that you are living through. You see, again, time flows, and when a person gains a little bit of freedom from consciousness, he has such a feeling as if time has stopped. The world is clear, everything falls into place, and he knows how to get out of his situation. Or having attained some kind of, let's just say, some people claim this is spiritual help, in reality it's not. In reality, Satan merely retreats and inner problems seem to subside. But again, why does Satan retreat? Because you pay him. And he retreats for a while. Will he not come back to those people? He will come back. Who actually, is there at least anyone who became free? No. Afterwards, he sooner or later overwhelms and hits them again, because this is the system and such is the law, you know. I would compare this to extortion. When there are criminals engaged in racketeering, if a businessman gives them money once, they will never leave him alone. I mean, they will bleed him dry. Isn't that true? The same is in this case. Why? Because it is all the same system, the same laws. All this is the world of animals.
There is another question, Igor Mikhailovich. At the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned bright flashes. Indeed, both a lot of gurus and those who fall into such practices say that with a very intensive concentration of attention, with such focused attention in the area of the soul, sort of a bright flash occurs which actually exalts a person a little bit.
It doesn't matter where you focus. What is the cause of this flash? When a person tries, or even better, when he begins to succeed a little bit in removing thoughts, in stopping this flow, that is, in focusing on a dot, he doesn't have to focus on the soul. He can focus on anything, even on the tip of his nose. Still, 100% concentration on nothing, so to say, eventually leads to the point when we, well, I'll put it figuratively, the neurons of our brain are all an analog of a microcircuit, something like that. Everything works of electricity, doesn't it? Our eyes perceive signals, then there is an electric impulse. From the optic thalamus, it is converted. Let's just say everything works of electricity. So, at this point, when we stop this power and it accumulates, well, this is a physical manifestation, excuse me, and the body plays a role here too. Yet, our neurons play a tremendous role. When we perform meditative practices and let some energies flow along the meridians.
Yes.
What happens? Along which meridians? This is exactly the neural group working, friends. So this link, let's say, In our body, there are lots of neurons in various places, and meridians are precisely a link between one group of neurons and another, while those very major clusters of neurons are our so-called chakrans and the like. It's just that in the past it wasn't known, but nowadays it's already known that there are a lot of neurons in our heart, a lot of neurons in our stomach, and they are not located chaotically, so you can see how simple everything is. Thus, when those neurons calm down and the energy grows, while in everyday life we spend a whole lot of it, just observe it, friends, simply conduct an experiment. Well, our Allatra friends don't need this, they know everything anyway. As for those who accidentally got here, so to say, and hear this for the first time, just conduct an experiment, sit still for a while and observe what's in your head. Don't do anything, just observe what's going on in your head, how thoughts come. But don't support them. When a thought comes, let it go. It's a horror what a mess begins in the head. If you don't pay attention to it, it seems that you don't have a single thought. But if you start paying attention to this process, then a lot of thoughts emerge, question. You don't really order them, you do not stimulate them, you do not request them, you don't form them. It's a continuous flow going on without your involvement, question. So who are you then? That's the whole point. Again, if you try to say something and it's not a memorized text, where do the words come from? How do you know what you'll say in a minute? After all, you don't know that. But you say it, and sometimes you yourself are surprised with what you babble, right? If you don't pay attention, everything is natural, but if you start paying attention, you are shocked. How can this happen? That's the point. But when a person, let's say, stops this irrational
Energy supply.
Yes, the irrational expenditure of this energy on all these thoughts which come, on every perception, comprehension and everything else, then plenty of this energy accumulates. If we consider this as electricity, let's examine it. For example, so it turns out that a lot of energy accumulates in our neurons, kind of a static charge. What will that lead to? To disease or something else, or to activation? Again, how do we perceive ourselves from the inside? I mean, if we go deep inside ourselves, we will not even find the point where we are. But it seems to us that we are in the head. Why? Because we have vision. We perceive vision as if we were in the head. And it seems to us that we are sort of in the head. There is nothing but our brain. Again, the screen. If we think about it, this is kind of… The frontal lobe is like the inner screen. We can see something there and so on, if we imagine something, right? The frontal lobes come into play, as it is said. In fact, they do not. They get activated, of course, but they do not create pictures. All that is something different. So, a simple question. What is happening at that moment? Why does the light appear? It is due to a static charge, so to speak. Just to make it clear, there is a discharge from its overaccumulation, and certainly there appears excitation of that very optic thalamus. And we already perceive through our consciousness, notice, we receive information that there is a bright light. There is exactly the same effect when a person falls, as they say, into sort of a state of death, or before he loses consciousness. I mean, the light goes out, or on the contrary, it lights up. These very effects are caused by the work of our inner vision, so to say. It is something more internal.
But it is perceived by different people as a very high degree of spiritual experience.
Right. Why? Because… But who is to blame for that? We ourselves are to blame.
Right.
Because when we try to explain something, we say that there is an inner light, don't we? Is consciousness able to form this inner light for us? It cannot form the true light, but it easily forms these false phenomena of light flashes and everything else. A simple example, when we hit our head, it seems to us that sparks fly from our eyes, right? Why? Because there is a flash. Due to what? Again, there's a short circuit between neurons.
A charge.
Absolutely right.
A static charge accumulates.
Release of a static charge occurs through a discharge. What kind of a discharge? One of two things. Either there is a loss of consciousness or something else. Like during a short circuit when electronics simply shut down. In the same way, the brain shuts down, restarts, and we come to our senses. Or it is discharged through light, right? I mean, there is a bright flash. So it's a natural byproduct. As for the true light, that which we are talking about, which appears from a person's contact with the spiritual world, in his work, in his purposeful and long-term work, It is actually a different light. It is constant, it is not of material origin. And it's already perceived at the level of feelings, but not visually, that's the difference. Well, in that case, all these effects which guys receive, this is exactly due to, excuse me, the inner vision. It is absolutely real, it may even come with an electric discharge and so on. Again, that very kundalini. This is the initial stage of a person's work on himself. If he uses, let's say, meditative practices on his spiritual path, then one of the meditative practices allows him to do what? To accumulate energy of that very electricity, for example, and to conduct it through the neural group to the head. In other words, a person has a sensation that indeed something bright and strong is moving in him. When it reaches the top of his head, a big flash appears.
Yes, a flash, a pillar of light.
Yes, the whole world becomes understandable and all that. These are merely the first skills, the first steps that lead nowhere. Does that lead to spiritual development? If it is used in order to comprehend the world structure, so to say, to understand oneself, and again, how to tame one's consciousness and how to work with it, simply as a step on the ladder leading to God, then yes, it works. But if your goal is to obtain some material rewards for yourself for nothing, or to buy something in this world in exchange for vril, for the power of life, does that work? Of course it works. Yes, if you do it all correctly, if you set really attainable goals, then yes, you can buy something in this material world. Does this work? It works. But this is something temporary. Again, whatever a person acquires in exchange for the power of life, in exchange for life in this material world, one won't have time to enjoy it. Well, and again, what kind of enjoyment is there in the material world, right? I understand if, as we said, it's a bowl of delicious, tasty dumplings with fried onions. In this case, yes, it's an infinite pleasure. But everything else quickly becomes boring. Any gadget, or a house, whatever house you may get, can a person enjoy it? Well, how can you enjoy a house? It is convenient and that's all. Eventually, even if you have a big house, you will use 2 rooms at best, as they say. Why do you need more?
Igor Mikhailovich, there is another question. What is the solution to avoid the situation, as you once said, when a person gets this outburst, a hormonal cocktail, and then he becomes absolutely exhausted for several weeks, and he thinks he's a great guru, he develops a huge megalomania, but in reality just emptiness inside, because he feels that there is no power, such a paradox in the inner.
You know, not always. If a person regularly performs practices, he doesn't experience this slump, lasting several weeks. That's if a person, let's say, starts practicing.
Tried it.
Yes, and it works for him. He has a surge for a couple of days.
He's puffed up with pride.
He's in heaven. He's a guru, he's a Buddha, and everything in the world at the same time, a prophet of all religions. But then, he becomes exhausted. Why? He has been devoured. And that's all, and the reality of this surrealism begins. In this case, again, 2, 3 weeks or a month passes. And unless some serious psychological changes occur, this state goes away after a while. Some people experience it for 2 weeks, some for a month, some longer. The energy potential levels out, so to speak. A person already begins to see life more or less normally and, let's say, returns back to normal. However, far and wide, this causes serious problems as well, that very schizophrenia and many other things. Well, it's already a completely different story, so to say. It's not the topic of today's conversation. How can you get out of this situation? Just don't engage in stupid things. If you, my friend, want to make money, go and work. If you don't have enough intelligence, ask your friends. Study, develop, and master. Any job is just a job, it's just a skill. If you want some kind of a career, and you need it, pursue a career. Do you know the rules of the game of this world? Just use them. While as for engaging in magic, you know, the devil always cheats. I'll be honest with you. He will cheat you anyway. He will take your life and give you an empty shell. You will play it for a while, and then what? A simple question. Why do you need that? If it's your life goal, you have the freedom of choice. A person can choose and do whatever he wants. If he wants to die, he will die. If he wants to become a subpersonality, he will become one. But if he wants to gain life, he will gain it. Everything is simple.
Igor Mikhailovich, how to gain life? I go back to the beginning of our conversation, to this most crucial question for a human being.
How to gain life?
Yes.
I'll put it simply, friends. Do not serve Satan, and start with a simple thing. Just love each other. Right? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, friends. Peace be with you.